and then if you want to come in. I am so happy that you came in so quickly and quietly, that definitely. Let's present you now how amazing you are. Most of our ninth graders were able to read the book Night. If I may see, don't talk to me, but by raising hands, how many of you, including adults, were able to read the book Night? Keep those up, please. Some of our seventh graders were able to read the book Yellow Star. If you read Yellow Star, will you keep your hands up high? All of you keep those hands up. If any of you read the book or saw the movie, The Boy in the Striped Pajamas, will you raise your hand? Thank you. Keep those up. If any of you remember at some point learning about Anne Frank or any story of the Holocaust, will you raise your hand? Thank you very much. You can put your hands down. We have a presenter here, as hopefully your English teachers explained to you, who is going to talk to us about his family story, their experience in the Holocaust, how it impacted them, how it has impacted him, what he has been able to learn about it, and hopefully he can share with us some additional things that we can take away, that we can then use to deal with some issues that might be happening now or might be happening in the future. I am going to ask for 3 things. First of all, remember, as we have talked about in your different classes, that some of the things he's going to talk about today are heavy. Not heavy on your muscles, but heavy in your heart. That can get very uncomfortable. And so a lot of times when we're feeling that, our reaction is to kind of lean over to a neighbor and make a joke, or, I need to go to the bathroom. No, you don't. You don't need to talk to your friends. You don't really need to go to the bathroom if you don't want to feel that heaviness. It's okay while he's talking to feel that. He's going to be talking about some heavy things. That's not going to last his whole presentation. He's also going to talk to us about then how to deal with that. How to know that bad things happen, but wonderful things can happen also. So I ask you please to be aware of your reactions. I ask you to listen to his story, to show him respect. You're an amazing audience, so I'm not repeating this for nothing. But still, please truly listen to what he was saying. And then lastly, think. Think about how we can take this information and how we can then make changes in ourselves, how we can set better examples for people around us, and how we can keep, as we have been doing as generals, making the world better and better. Professor Guiora works up at the University of Utah. He does a lot of traveling, he does a lot of speaking, and as you know, he has a book, so he does a lot of writing. I want to let you know that he has offered to answer some additional questions at the end of this. So I'll explain how that's going to work when we get closer to the end. But if he mentions something, or one of your teachers has mentioned something, you've read something on the internet, and you've got a question you really want him to answer, please keep that in your mind, because I will give him a chance to answer that at the end. And now I am very humbled to present to you Professor Guiora.
Good morning. Can you all hear me?
Yes.
I was 12 years old in Ann Arbor, Michigan, where I grew up, when my father said, let's go canoeing, which was an odd thing for my father to say, because my father was not in any way a sportsman, much less a canoeist. And we were in the middle of the Huron River, which is the river in Ann Arbor, when he said to me the following words: in 1 minute, I'm going to tell you my Holocaust story. And in 1 minute, I'm going to tell you your mother's Holocaust story. And this is the first and last time you and I will ever have this discussion. And this is the first and last time the word Holocaust will ever be mentioned in our house. So he told me his story, which, well, as we get into it, I'll explain to you what he told me was incorrect, but that's okay. And I frankly don't really remember what he told me about my mom's story, but I do know today that whatever he told me was also incorrect. At the end of this odd canoe trip, I went home. I'm an only child. The only person I had to talk to was the family dog. And I said, yo, dog, we got a problem here. Because I had nobody to talk to. Remember, I'm 12. And life is difficult enough at 12 without being confronted with this awesome thing called the Holocaust. And to know that both of my parents survived the Holocaust without having any background information whatsoever. But I respected my parents' request that I not ask any questions, that I not in any way engage with them about the Holocaust, because they meant what they said, and they said what they meant. When I went off to college, I had a mentor who was not Jewish, whose wife, like me, was Jewish, whose wife, like me, was an only child, and whose wife, like me, knew nothing about her parents. So he said to me, you know, Amos, at some point in life, you have to come to grips with being Jewish, with Judaism, and the Holocaust. And I said, that strikes me as a reasonable proposition. What should I do? He said, why don't you write an honors thesis about some aspect of the Holocaust? I said, that sounds like a good idea. So I went home, and I told my parents that they liked him a lot, we should have. And I said, hey, Professor Evans wants me to write this thesis about, the Holocaust. And my mom looked at my dad and said to him, it's time for dinner. And that was their reaction to me writing about the Holocaust. 20 years ago, my father, the Hungarian Catholic Church in Hungary decided to do an expose, to undertake their mea culpa about their role in the Holocaust. And they wanted a keynote speaker who was a world-famous academic who spoke Hungarian, who was from Hungary, which is what my dad is. And they asked my dad to be the keynote speaker, which is great. It's pretty cool stuff. The Vatican was there, it was under the auspices of the Vatican and all that. It's a great story. The only interesting relevant for us is that my dad never told me this. I'm today 62, I was then 42, so I'm an adult at the age of 42. And even through the age of the 42, they didn't share with me anything about their experiences. 7 years ago, while training for the Salt Lake Marathon, and I don't know if any of you train for marathons, it's just endless hours and endless miles. My running partner, who's a woman who is not Jewish, we were in the middle of one of those awful 20-mile runs, said to me, how did this being Holocaust, how did this happen? And I had a brilliant academic response, which was, I have no idea. This was on a Saturday morning. I came home and I said to myself, enough. That the time has come for me at the age of 54 or 55 to finally come to grips with who I am, who my parents are, and what were their experiences. So Amy mentioned I wrote a book called The Crime of Complicity, and that's the kickoff for this conversation. As I learned over the course of time of researching my parents, first of all, I want to emphasize I had no cooperation from my parents at all. Here's what I learned, and this will answer, I hope, some of the wonderful questions that you all sent through Amy to me. My mom, who's today's almost 88, she lives in Jerusalem, but at the time of the Holocaust, she was 12. So you referenced the Diary of Anne Frank. My mother's, those of you who have read the Diary of Anne Frank, my mother's story is in essence the story of Anne Frank, or the Anne Frank story. The Nazis came to Budapest, where my mom was a child, in March of 1944. And immediately thereafter, my grandfather was sent to a work camp in the Ukraine. And my mother and grandmother, like Anne Frank, went into hiding in the attic. They were fed every day by an elderly Catholic woman who risked life and limb to bring them food every single day, up the stairs, down the stairs, up the stairs, down the stairs. My mother, like me, is an only child, and see, the only person she was in hiding with was my grandmother. Like with Anne Frank, one day came the inevitable knock on the door. And knocking on the door, obviously, were the bad guys, the Nazis and or their Hungarian collaborators. My mother's 12. It's nighttime. They are taken down the stairs to the courtyard of this building. there's a wall. And they are lined up against the wall to be shot. My mother remembers to this day hearing the gun being cocked. And seconds away from being killed, my grandmother whispers to my mother the following words. When you hear the first shot, fall. And I will fall on top of you. They will kill me, but I will protect you and save you. Okay. At the last second, right after that, Jewish partisans who had stolen uniforms of the Hungarian collaborators came up to the Hungarian collaborators and said to them, leave these Jews to us, we'll take care of them. And the ruse fortunately worked, because if it didn't work, I wouldn't be here. But here's what happens thereafter. My mom and grandmother have been freed, if you will. But they know they can't go back upstairs to the attic because they've been outed. It's nighttime. What do? Where do you go? So my grandmother takes my mother by her hand, and they run through the streets of Budapest. They're trying desperately to find a safe house, hopefully, because that's the only way to be saved. And they're fortunate they find a safe house, where from there too, they are yet again outed, again the knock at the door, again taken to be shot. Stop. The first story I know from my mother, not because she told it to me, but because she wrote about it. And she wrote about it after her mom died in 1980. And she's willing to share that in print. She, under no condition, is willing to talk about it. So much so, in parentheses, I have to add, I told my mom this morning that I'm coming to speak here. My mother never, ever, ever, ever has ever spoken in a study like this to anyone about her Holocaust experiences. She asked me to report back afterwards, but there's no way that she as a Holocaust survivor could do something like this. And by the way, I want to say, Amy, for you to invite me to speak here, in essence, on my parents' behalf, is for me overwhelming. So I thank you for that. The second time that she was taken to be shot, to this day, I do not know how she was saved. My mother will take to her grave, unfortunately, how she was saved the second time. My father. My father was 19 years old and was a student in the Jewish school in Budapest. The Nazis used, this is perverse, but the Nazis used the Jewish school in Budapest as the headquarters for interrogation. They came to Budapest on March 18, 1944, and they came to the Jewish school to set up their interrogation. They walked into the classroom where my father was in. They knocked, well actually they didn't knock on the door, they barged in. And they said to the Jewish students, what are you doing here? And my father, for reasons that I never understood where it came from, said to the Nazis, what are you doing here? It's to this day not clear to me how they didn't shoot him, but because if they would have, I wouldn't be here either, right? On June 13th, 1944, which was his birthday, he was ordered to go to a train station, bus station, train depot, I don't know, and transported by train, by bus, by truck, I don't know, to a work camp in Yugoslavia. A work camp is not a place where you pleasantly work. It's a mining camp. Because those of you who have looked into the Holocaust and studied somewhat about the Holocaust, you know that the Germans needed ore for the military industry. They needed the mines. The camp is called Bor, B-O-R. It is a horrible, horrible place. You can find pictures of Bor on Google. It is as stark and awful as a mining work camp can be. It's also winter. It's now November 1944. I don't know if any of you have been to Europe or Central Europe in the winter, but cold is cold. Really cold. I take you back to when we went canoeing And he told me he had been in this camp, nothing happened there. And then not only did nothing happen in this camp, but how was he saved? According to this story he told me when I was 12, a Russian jeep showed up and took my father from Vor to Sofia in Bulgaria. And that's how he survived the Holocaust. I mean, and when you're 12, maybe I assume all of you are far more intelligent and sophisticated and thoughtful than I was when I was 12. I believe the story, hook, line, and sinker, that a Russian jeep showed up especially and specifically for my father. Well, obviously that's not true. In November of 44, some of you may know, the Nazis started closing down the concentration camps because they realized the war was going to end at some point, and the Russians were coming from the east. At this camp called Guiora, there were 10,000 Jews. Parentheses I add, my father had said nobody died there, it wasn't that bad. Incorrect. The camp commander, who was a sadist, whipped Jews to death. Didn't shoot them, saved bullets, whipped them to death. But in November of 44, with the Russians coming, they decided to close the camp, and they divided the 10,000 Jews, including my father, into two groups, 5,000 and 5,000. The first group is taken back to Hungary, promised freedom, but it was a ruse because when they got to the Hungarian border, all 5,000 were murdered. Not one survives. For reasons that I do not know, my father was in the second group. In the second group, which is now my father, somewhere around the 5th, 9th of November 1944, goes on what is called a death march. They leave this camp called Vor, go to another town in Yugoslavia. There, Yugoslavian partisans, some of you may have heard about partisans in some of the books, ambushed the German guards, killed some of them, not all of them. And here's my father's story from here on. It's nighttime. It's the dead of winter. Every man or woman, in this case it was all men, on their own. Here's what my father was wearing. He's wearing one shirt, one pair of pants, he has one pair of shoes, no socks, because if you looked at the Holocaust, you know that prisoners didn't have socks. No coat, no hat, no gloves, no scarf, no Instagram, no Facebook, no Twitter, no Google Map, no Google Earth, no anything. So what do you do now? How do you save yourself? As I learned, there was no Jeep. But what was there was this. He led a group of guys on a 138 kilometer, roughly 62, 65 mile hike, walk through the Carpathian Mountains, up and down, up and down, up and down, up and down. No food, no water, no shelter, not knowing if he's going to be killed by the Russians, the Germans, or the villagers. What he did see, where they sometimes would go into villages, and they were clearly prisoners, because they had the yellow star, they had the prisoner outfit. Villagers would taunt them with water. But nobody offered any assistance. At the end of this 138 kilometer walk, which is a form of a death march, and when I use the phrase death march, I mean it very seriously, because death is not around the corner, death is staring you smack dab in front of you. Every moment. They get to Sofia in Bulgaria, and from there he makes his way to Palestine, and so that's how he survived the Holocaust. So some of you asked if unfortunately while writing the book, my father died, but I think if he were here, and I am not his spokesman, but to some of the questions that you posed, I think these would be his answers. I think for him, the scariest moment is that entire walk. Because you're aware of the fact that literally death can happen anytime. That's one. Two, you realize you're absolutely and totally on your own. There ain't nobody to call. Why? Full stop. Because I told you that he had been a student in Budapest. My grandparents, my paternal grandparents, lived in a small town in eastern Hungary, and they were deported to Auschwitz on May 26, 1944. They were murdered the same day that they arrived in Auschwitz. Sometimes it's a terrible word, but the system was so fast that in some cases people who arrived were murdered the same day. That's the case with my grandparents. My father never knew that. It was only after the war ended that he knew the fate of his parents. But what he did know on that death march, he and the guys he was with, the 4 or 5 other people, that was his world. It would strike me he's my father, I'm the son, strike me as a beyond terrifying experience, frankly. My mom will tell you the following. For her, the scariest moments were the following. And if it's dramatic, I don't mean it to be dramatic because it is what it is. Hearing the cock of it, the gun being cocked, I think for her was beyond terrifying. I need to add that my grandmother must have been the coolest cucumber in town. For those of us who are parents, to be so incredibly rational in that incredibly terrifying moment when you know you're about to be killed. To tell your child to fall, I'll fall on top of you, tells you everything and anything you need to know about my grandmother. As a parent, I can't really imagine thinking so clearly and coherently about what needs to be done. Second scary moment for my mom, clearly when they're running through the streets of Budapest. Why scary? Because they have the yellow star and they're running. And if you're running, you're not running to the local grocery store, you're running because you're in danger. And I would imagine the third scariest moment is when she was taken again to be shot, which again, I don't know, as I told you earlier, I don't know how she was saved there. So, in writing the book and in delving into my family history, here's what I learned, and I'll try to make it relevant to you all. One, my image of my father was my dad was a professor also, was of this academic who couldn't make his way from here to here without my mom helping him. And it turns out that's not true. When I was 15, I'm sure not like you guys, but when I was 15, I was probably a little bit, edgy and asking difficult questions, sometimes not politely. And I said to my father, everybody's dad, jogs, walks, exercises, does something really cool. You're like the only dad who doesn't do anything. And my father, who never yelled at me with one exception, but this was not the time, looked at me and said really quietly the following words. He says to me, I survived the Holocaust. Don't you think that's enough? And my reaction then, I have no doubt in retrospect, I must have walked backwards, back into my room, closed the door, and said, sorry. And I think father to teenager, I think that's a brilliant answer. Because there's no need to be, you can be subtle about it. So here's what I learned. One, I had no idea who my parents were. I had no idea of their experiences. How does that impact and affect you or me as an only child? One, I had gained, obviously, incredible respect for my parents. And I need to add, again, were my mother here, she would tell you the following. We use the term Holocaust survivor. My mother rejects that term. She says, I am not a survivor, I am a Holocaust victor. I won. And there is a profound difference between survivor and victor. She does not see herself in any way as a victim. She says, I defeated them. And I think if you think about the books you're reading, to view the Holocaust in that context, I think is really important. Next, for me, what's really important in analyzing my parents' experiences is who helps them and who didn't help them. And the reality is, no one helped them. And when Amy asked me to talk about how do I apply that to society today, and looking at the future leaders of the world, if there's one thing that I would put out there as an important message, do not be a bystander. Do not be passive. And if you see someone in distress, he, she, it, they, to say, oh, wow, that's bad. It's not helpful. And regardless of your age, you can always do something to help someone. Full stop, turn. Why did I write this crazy-ass book? Because I wanted to honor my dad. And I wanted to put out there his story or her story, and then to apply it to society today. And when I look around, and as Amy knows, I give this talk in Europe, Canada, Israel, America, the one thing I would like people to take away is the following. That we absolutely all owe a duty to each other. It's not some trite mantra. And regardless of your age, you can always act to do the right thing. It's really easy to turn away. The monkey rule, right? Didn't see, didn't hear. So when I think about my mom running through the streets of Budapest, or my dad on that awful, horrible 138-kilometer walk, and that not one person offered them any assistance whatsoever, I say to myself, how can that be? How can it actually be that if you see a child, my mother was your age, she was 12, running with her mom, and nobody does anything? It doesn't make sense to me in 2020. It doesn't make sense to me looking back to 1944. I find that to be simply astonishing on a human level. So, in the context of your questions, is that scary? Yeah, hell yes. But not only is it scary, it has to be absolutely devastating. Because it means you're absolutely and totally on your own. And that just can't be. That to me is something that, at my old age, boggles the mind. And the same thing applies to the death march, that 138 kilometers that my father did. I wish I could tell you that I knew where he slept. I assumed, under the tree, maybe. It's cold. I know it gets cold here. It was seriously cold in Europe in the 40s. Especially if you have no coat and no anything, and no food. And how is it that people don't help? Again, I'll tell you, I don't know. But for me, the perhaps most important takeaway of this entire project, and why I was so happy to come speak, and I welcome discussion on this, because for me it really is the most important issue of the day today. What duty do you owe me, and what duty do I owe you? And unless we address that directly, it's very difficult for us to make that great leap forward. What else have I learned? That it's really easy to turn away from people in trouble or from people in distress. It's easy to do that. It's tempting. Speak Yiddish. Some of you asked, if I recall correctly, what made did my parents find a job afterwards? So when my father arrived in Palestine in 1944, he joined a unit in the British Army and went back to Europe for one reason, one purpose, and one purpose only, and that was to try to find Nazis and to kill them. He was sent to Italy, but by that time the war was over in Italy, so he never saw any combat. And from then on, he developed a professional career. My mom, for reasons that I have never asked her, and I don't think I have the courage to ask her, when the war was over in the May of 45, she and my grandparents stayed in Hungary, and my mother came to Israel in 1949, joined the kibbutz, and then met my father, and the rest is history. Some of you asked me, when I speak publicly or when I write, is there some reaction when people find out I'm Jewish? So I've thought, Amy, long and hard about how to answer that question. I want to do it respectfully, but honestly, that's kosher. When the book came out almost 3 years ago, it's been translated. The good news is it's been translated into Dutch, into Chinese. It's, I think, in its third and fourth print run. I'm now working on the sequel. That's all great. What I did not expect was the following. I'm going to be very blunt, and I apologize in advance. I did not expect to get death threats. It never occurred to me that a book like this would result in death threats, which were specific and very graphic about how to kill me. They started coming in 3 o'clock in the morning on a particular day. I got emails, I got anonymous letters, all kinds of terrible things posted about me. And I had to make the following decision. I had to make 2 decisions. Decision number 1 was, will I share this with my mom? And the problem is that my mom, God love her, has Google alerts on me. So every time I'm in the news, Mom reads about me. And because some of the postings, the death threats were posted on various internet sites, and my wife and I had to make a decision, do I share this with my mom? And we decided that we do, because I wanted to tell her rather than have a Google alert come to her. But fortunately, those of you who anything know about Google and the algorithms, they block screen death threats, so she never actually saw them, which is a good thing. And the second decision that my family and I had to make was the following. Do I go into a cave and stop speaking? Do I go into a cave and stop writing? Or do I actually do the exact opposite? Become even more public? A, B. And I decided, the hell with it. That the more threats I got, the more I wanted to speak. And I actually wrote an article about what it's like to get death threats and to continue speaking. I met with the police, obviously, because the death threats are serious stuff. And I was asked, do I want to change my daily habit? I go work out, and I said, hell no. This is where I live, this is who I am, this is where I work out, this is where I go to work, and this is what I do every damn day. That was, my decision. And the only reason I share that with you is the following. First of all, it's unpleasant to get death threats. It's unpleasant to read how you're going to die. Not die, sorry, be killed. And they were really graphic. The really graphic ones, I'll spare you, but one that's relevant to our conversation is the following. I got a typewritten letter. Do you guys do they know what a typewriter is? No. So a typewriter is a thing from 1954. And the letter is sent from postmarked Cleveland, Ohio, but no return address. But typed. And the writer, the letter says the following. Professor Guiora, no dear, but right, this Professor Guiora. I've watched you on YouTube often, because a lot of my talks are on YouTube. I've watched you on YouTube often, and there are 3 things I want you to know. 1, the next Holocaust will happen shortly. 2, people like you, not him, me, people like you will be responsible for the next Holocaust. 3, people like you will be killed in the next Holocaust. Full stop. He says, if you have some time, I have some additional thoughts I'd like to share with you. And then he goes on a rant about that Jews have no conscience, and that I am a manifestation of a Jew without conscience, And he finishes before signing off, I remind you that you will be the victim of the next Holocaust. I thought to myself, one, who the hell writes a letter like this? I mean, this dude took time to actually type that letter out. And he took time to find my damn address and to put it in the mail. He actually wasted a stamp. But here's what it really told me. How much hate there is out there. For people to write like that, or people to send me other emails about hanging me upside down in the village square, or a lovely posting wishing me a safe trip to Auschwitz, tells you the following. 2019, now 2020, how much hate there is out there. I find it astonishing that if you write a book about the Holocaust, you get death threats. It doesn't make any sense to me. And my final comment before questions, it's a plea to you, an open plea, to fight hatred 24/7. You cannot be passive in the face of hatred. It's ugly. It's out there. It can destroy societies. And if you're passive in the face of hatred, then you're doing nothing more than enabling it. And we do not have that luxury. Thank you very much.
Hi, ladies and gentlemen, I'm the world's ugliest crier. If you hadn't told that story about my mom, I might have been okay. Ladies and wow, can we please give him another round of applause? Thank you. You are here helping to represent your mom and dad on behalf of the 7th and 9th graders, Eisenhower Junior High. Will you please carry back to your mom our respect and our admiration? That is incredible. And prayers up to your dad telling him the same thing. An incredible story and an amazing message. And I'm going to go cry in the bathroom. The book that Professor Guiora, one of the books he wrote, but the one that we can get, I just want to remind you, we do have it available on our school website. You can order it, and when we get it delivered, we'll get that passed out to you. So please remember that is there. Teachers, we do have a bit of time. Students, if, oh my gosh, I can't start. I don't stop crying. Teachers, if you have a student who has a question, or any of our, so if it's a teacher who has a question, or any of our students, will you raise your hand? And teacher, will you just keep an eye out for a student, and will you double check? If it's a thumbs up, yes, let's ask this in front of everybody. If it's a question, if you know, let's ask him personally, then maybe let your student know. And okay, there we go. So teachers, will you kind of wave in a general direction? And if you feel like it's a question, yes, you know what, that would, the whole audience should hear that. And let's, all right, here we go. Thank you, guys.
How long did it take to get your research, and how long did it take to get enough to write an entire book about it?
Well, that's a great question. So, generally for me, from the beginning of a book project to the end of a book project, it takes me about a year. This book took much longer for a number of different reasons. One, because I had to go to Holland, Germany, and Hungary. I had to go in country. I had to find people to interview. I had to find translators who would translate. But even before that, I had to understand exactly what I wanted to write. And I wanted to, even before that, you'll appreciate this. When I decided to write the book, no, I have to actually go 2 steps back. That's okay. The book is about the bystander. And when I began the project, in addition to my parents' story, I had to confront unrelated to the Holocaust, I have to confront a horrific family tragedy, unrelated to the Holocaust. Because it's in the book, I can talk about it. When I was 5 years old, I had two cousins who were twins. Their mother had abandoned them because one of the twins had muscular sclerosis, and so he was a challenge. And so every weekend, my parents would take the twins in to give my uncle a break. And we were swimming in a public swimming pool in Israel, and the 14-year-old who was handicap challenged, he and I were in the water alone. I mean, just the two of us. And we had an argument of some kind that you need to leave. I told him, you can't swim, you can't swim, you can't swim. Da, 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 da. I got out of the water, and he drowned and died. I was 5. So to your question, what made writing the book so difficult for me, in addition to examining my parents, is I had to take a really long, hard look as to me as a 5-year-old and whether a 5-year-old is a bystander. And that's why the book opens with the story about my cousin's drowning. So when I went to my mom and told her I want to write the book, my mother's first reaction was, please don't. I said, well, let's think about it. She said, no, the answer is no. And my mom is 5'2", weighs 97 pounds, and nobody messes with my mom to this day. And I said, well, let's think about it. And it took her a month. This is related to your question. We negotiated for a month, and we came up with the following solution, compromise. I'll write, she won't read it. I'll write it, she won't hold it. But once I understood I wanted to write about the bystander, once I had the plan in place to go in country and interview people who I wanted to interview, it became a much faster process. And I'm also fortunate I write relatively quickly, and I am particularly fortunate for all of you future law students. I am particularly fortunate that I have a great group of students who work with me on these books, and that facilitates and makes the process much, much easier. But at the end of the day, you sit in hotel rooms and you write the book. So I think this book probably took me like 4 years to write, which is much longer than any other book I've ever written. Other questions?
Hi.
Okay.
This was like, gosh, I was just freaking out about like how, like, you get death threats about writing a book like this, and just like, gosh. And so my question is, what made you want to write a book like that? Because
No, it's a great question. And here's the answer is the following. Like anybody who teaches, I write a lot, but all my other books have been about national security and about international law. I had no intention of ever writing this book. Never, ever wanted to write about the Holocaust. Never occurred to me. Until that run with the woman who's referred to in the book as M, and I realized that the time had come to find out who the hell my parents were. That was, to your question, which is an excellent question, that was the sole motivation for the book, was to find out who my parents were. And then as I got into it, the motivation very clearly became as the only way I knew how to honor my father, because I knew he was dying while I was writing the book. I don't do carpentry, I don't paint, I don't do woodworking, I have no skills whatsoever. The only thing I know how to do is to blah, 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 and to write. And I decided to write the book as a way to honor him. And I tried to finish it, back to your question, I was speed writing, because I knew he was dying. And I literally speed writing, and I wanted to finish the damn thing before he died. And unfortunately, I did not succeed. It came out after he died, best efforts aside. But to your question, and I've been asked, that's a great question. I've asked myself also, like, why did I get into this damn project? In the world of unintended consequences, the book has totally changed my life. I know it sounds dramatic, but it's true, because the next book I'm working on about sexual assaults would not have happened without this book. If not for this book, I wouldn't have come to Eisenhower Junior High School. If not for this book, there's legislation that's been introduced in the Utah legislature based on the book. So, I can't ask you why the hell I did it, other than to honor my dad, but I'm certainly glad I did it.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you.
Hi.
Howdy.
I don't know if you know the answer to this question, but do you know how your parents felt when Hitler was no longer in power?
Well, so Hitler is suicides May 8th, I think May 8th, 1945, if I recall correctly. He kills Ava Brown, the girlfriend. He kills the dog, I don't remember the dog's name. Yeah, you're the one who asked the question. I thought about that last night when Amy sent me the question. Here's the reality. I have a laundry list of questions like this that I'd like to ask my dad, but I can't because he's died. And this one to ask my mom, and she's not going to answer any question. I don't even know when the world knew that Hitler had died. I mean, I don't know that. I think I told you that my father was in Italy then, trying to find Nazis, and my mother was back in Hungary. I have no idea whatsoever when the world was informed by whomever, by BBC or whomever, that Hitler had died. The only thing I do know, when the war ended in May 45, my father didn't go back to Palestine. He went from Italy to Hungary, trying to find out which of his family members had survived. Don't ask me how, because I do not know. He found his brother somehow, and they together learned, don't ask me how, do not know, because my uncle has also died. That's when they found out that their parents, my grandparents, had been murdered in Auschwitz. How he found out, I do not know. But I do know the following. I told you that my grandparents had been murdered on May 26, 44. While researching the damn book, my father has a cousin or whatever in Tel Aviv. Through him, I found out, this is awful, but we're adults, right? Mm-hmm. I know what my grandmother's last words were. See if I can get through this. They're standing in the selection line in Auschwitz. My grandmother in one line, my grandfather in the other line, they separated sexes. And I do not know when they were standing in the selection line who my grandfather was engaging with, talking with. I do not know. I know that they weren't in the line together because she was here and he was here, or whichever. I also have no pictures of my grandfather, so I don't know what as he's standing in the damn selection line, what's going through his mind. I assume he understands that, the fate that awaits him. My father's mom, my grandmother, is standing with a cousin, one of my father's cousins, this cousin who survives. I don't know how, don't even know her name. But my grandmother, you want mom? My grandmother turns to the cousin as they're in the selection line, literally minutes away from the gas chamber, because that's how they were murdered. And she says to the cousin, how will the boys, meaning my father and my uncle, how will the boys survive? That's as far as I know, because again, I have nobody to talk to. Or if I have someone to talk to, they won't cooperate with me. Other questions?
Thank you.
Thank you.
So I was wondering with how some religions are treated now, like maybe Mormons.
I'm sorry?
With how some religions are treated now with Mormons, what's your opinion on that?
Wow. We're all adults in the room, right? There's enormous tension in the context of not only inter-religious, but intra-religious. as a Jew, but as a non-practicing Jew, I'm a firm believer that you can be whatever the hell you want to be, as long as you don't make me want you to be me, or me to be you. And I really don't care if you want to, I grew up in Ann Arbor, Michigan. I'm the world's biggest University of Michigan football fan. I hate Ohio State, I hate Notre Dame, and as long as you agree with me on that, you and I can be friends. But I really don't, the whole notion of me imposing my faith on you is something that just doesn't work for me. Next.
Hello.
Howdy.
So I just wanted to ask, do you know about other genocides happening?
Sure. That's a great question, which reflects ill on mankind. Where are we? 2020. Right, the theory was after the Holocaust, mankind has learned that this can't happen again, can't happen again until, what do you want to be in, Rwanda, Bosnia, former Yugoslavia, what's happening in Myanmar at the moment, what's happening to the Uyghurs in China. That's 4 examples in 2 seconds, and my instinct tells me there are others that we don't even know about, that, you know, they're under the radar. It boggles the mind, that's a polite way of putting it, how after the Holocaust, this still happens. Again, Rwanda, former Yugoslavia, Myanmar, the Uyghurs in China, and I have no doubt whatsoever that I'm missing out on other examples. And when I told you earlier about hatred, that you can't turn your back from hatred, genocides happen because we turn our back to the horrible things that happen. And talk about the evil amongst some men and women. That's how, do you know how genocide happens? It happens on 2 different reasons. One, because there's some nasty people out there. But those nasty people can only do genocides if good people turn their back. If good people don't turn their back, it doesn't happen. Good people turn their back, it happens.
So, do you know the one in Burma?
I'm sorry?
Are
I didn't hear the
you,
question.
are you familiar with the one in Burma?
Sure, Myanmar, yeah, sure. Yeah, sure.